Excellent. Well, everybody, welcome to this virtual presentation from Fort C.F. Smith Park. For those of you who have not yet met me, my name is John McNair. I'm the park historian out here, and I am also a park programmer for the Arlington County Department of Parks and Recreation. It's my job one way or another to bring you programs about Arlington County's rich past, be it in person or through the magic of the internet. Um, by now, I think we are all getting very used to these virtual presentations, and yet I find that I never quite get the hang of it right until we get started. Fun fact about today's presentation, I actually thought I lost it until about an hour ago. And some of the slides that you see here are screen grabs from a previously recorded version of the PowerPoint. So I'm hoping everything's going to look great, but if at any point a slide looks a little bit less than perfect, that is my fault, and I hope that's okay. Now, today's program, today's edition of History Highlights, I should say, our virtual lecture series, is one that I first began doing right at the outset of the pandemic when we switched over to this virtual format. One of the nice things about experimenting with virtual presentations is it really gave the park programmers the freedom to run with programs that they had never run in person, that had only been sort of half developed, and really go from there. As such, we've got a lot of exciting new topics, a lot of exciting new themes that are all coming to you into different forms. Now, by sheer coincidence, at the same time that we started experimenting with our programs, Arlington County Parks got a new addition. A new private park was built in Arlington, now formally known as Selina Gray Square. Even though it is not technically an Arlington County park of the Parks Department, our Parks Department did have a hand in helping out with some of the finer points of getting the park made, and now it is, for lack of a better term, a park that is part of our extended family. Again, still not a county park, but one that we very much have an interest in, and one in which we feel some responsibility in telling the story of. After all, anytime you get a park, a school, a public building, anything that's named after a person, the obvious question that's always going to follow is, who is that? So we decided to come up with this little program to help introduce our residents of Arlington County to the fascinating life and times of Selina Norris Gray, namesake of Selina Gray Square, savior of the George Washington artifacts, and by and large, one of the most important figures to emerge from post-Civil War Arlington County. Now, to tell Selina's story properly, we are gonna have to go back a few years. Now, here we go. All right. So to understand Selina's life, we have to understand the world that she is born into, and that is the world of slavery in Arlington. Learning about slavery in Arlington County is very tricky, more so than really any other county in Virginia, and I'd even go as far as to say most counties in the United States as a whole. Arlington has always been something of an oddball. As many of you may know, Arlington has not always been part of the state of Virginia. In 1791, when surveyors first began mapping out sections of the northern and southern banks of the Potomac River to build a new federal capital, the future District of Columbia, that district includes what is now Arlington County. And so from the foundation of the District of Columbia all the way up to the retrocession of Alexandria back to the state of Virginia in 1847, you've got this strange little Virginia county that isn't quite Virginia, but also isn't quite the District of Columbia. And that's going to lead to a number of very interesting contradictions where it comes to the emergence of slavery. Again, a very common question that I get asked is, How many enslaved persons were living in Arlington County prior to the Civil War? And the simple answer to that is I have no idea. I've looked, I've tried to research this. I've spoken to historians. It is very difficult to track enslaved persons in Arlington County, and that's for a number of reasons. So, for starters, like I said, Arlington was not always in the state of Virginia. It began as part of the District of Columbia. So, in those early census records, um, whereas I might be able to find an enslaved population list for Fairfax County, Virginia, or I might be able to find a list for Loudoun County, Virginia. If I were to look up Arlington, first I would have to look at the District of Columbia. And depending on the year, sometimes it would just say the District of Columbia. There's no distinction between Northern Bank and Southern Bank as far as the census goes. So there's no distinction between enslaved persons living on the south side and enslaved persons living in the north side. This is going to lead to some very serious abuses of the slave system here in the South, and something that any enslaved person living in the future Arlington County would have to be painfully aware of. When the federal district is first formed and it takes up that land, that northern land in Maryland and that southern land in Virginia, it has to grapple with the fact that all of a sudden, former Maryland residents and former Virginia residents now have to live together under this odd system of the District of Columbia, both its own independent entity, but at the same time, not a state. So one of the quickest ways that it's seen this could be abused is through the issue of slavery. At this moment in time, members of Congress do not really want to come down hard one way or another on the issue of slavery. There are some very dangerous implications to Congress establishing the norms for slavery in a given area. And when the District of Columbia is first founded, that is exactly what they are supposed to do. Because when the district is first founded, Congress are the administrators. There's no mayor, there's no governor, there's nobody to govern the district outside of Congress. So to work around that, Congress punts the ball. They decree very early on that in the District of Columbia, if you live on the north side of the Potomac, you follow the laws of Maryland in regards to slavery. And if you live on the south side of the Potomac, you follow the laws of Virginia. However, there are also rules put in place in the District of Columbia, in the state of Maryland, and in the state of Virginia regarding how enslaved persons can be imported to or from the states. They're very strong limitations, and limitations that slave owners on all sides of the Potomac are looking for ways to ignore. Many look at the District of Columbia as a great way to abuse that system. So, for example, say you are an enslaver from Calvert County, Maryland, and you are looking to move enslaved persons from Maryland out into Fauquier County, Virginia. In theory, you can't do this. So what you can do is you can use the District of Columbia as something of a laundering system. Enslaved persons can be moved from Maryland into the north side of the district. They can then be moved from the north side of the district to the south side of the district, and then from the south side of the district into the state of Virginia, all circumventing those importation restrictions from Maryland and from Virginia. This is going to come to a head in 1844 with the Supreme Court case of Moses Bell, plaintiff in error. Moses Bell was an enslaved man from the District of Columbia who was illegally trafficked from Alexandria County into Fairfax County and then later to Fauquier County. So the Supreme Court realizes this is a problem. They realize that the District of Columbia, in their words, is becoming a swinging door for slavery in the Chesapeake region. In 1844, they will rule in favor of Moses Bell. They will declare that that is not how the system is supposed to work. And enslaved persons cannot be trafficked through DC from Maryland to Virginia or vice versa. But that is a moot point, because within 2 years of that decision, Alexandria County will be retroceded back to the state of Virginia, and it won't matter. At least it won't matter for the enslavers. It will matter for the enslaved people. Because now the enslaved people of the District of Columbia, and in particular the south side of the district, the people of Arlington and Alexandria, now no longer have the protections that being in the district afforded them. Now it is much easier for them to be trafficked to and from the county and disappear entirely. The insulation that they could have tried to count on when Arlington was part of the district suddenly disappears at the start of 1847. Now, by 1847, by the time of Arlington's retrocession back to Virginia, Selina Norris is a young woman living at the Arlington plantation as an enslaved housekeeper. We believe she is born in 1824. She is going to live her life among the enslaved population at the Arlington plantation, and she is going to quickly become the personal maid and sometimes confidant of Mary Custis, Lady of the House and wife of U.S. Army Colonel Robert E. Lee. While Selina Gray is managing the affairs of the house for the Lee family, she is going to marry one Thornton Gray. Thornton Gray was another enslaved person at the Arlington plantation. He could actually trace his lineage back to what we call the Dowager slaves of Mount Vernon, the enslaved persons from the Mount Vernon plantation that passed to George Washington's adopted stepson, George Washington Parke Custis, founder of Arlington. There is even some evidence to suggest that Thornton Gray may have been freed as a result of the Mount Vernon manumissions, but that he remained in slavery in Arlington, perhaps by choice, perhaps not. According to family lore, Selina and Thornton will actually be married in the Arlington House, something which would have been very irregular for enslaved persons in the state of Virginia. And many people will point to that as a sign of the close relationship between the Gray family and the Lee family. Unfortunately, things are never really that cut and dry. It is important to remember that while Selina Gray was trusted with an immense task, the management of the interior operations of the Arlington House, the personal business of Mary Custis Lee, it is also important to remember that during that time, Selina Norris Gray was at the mercy of the Lee family. At any given moment, she, her husband, or any of their 8 children could be sold away from the property. Future historians will point to some sort of friendship between the two families that they will argue made such an arrangement impossible. That's simply not the case, and you need look no further than to Selina's siblings to see how that is not the case. Selina is not the only Norris who lives at Arlington. She also lives there with several siblings, some of whom will become even more famous than her for a different reason. Prior to the American Civil War, 2 of Selina's siblings, Wesley Norris and Mary Norris, will escape from the plantation. They will be captured, they will be brought back, and they will be publicly punished by whipping. This is going to cause a huge sensation in the newspapers because at that time, Robert E. Lee is a leading military figure, and according to some newspapers, it is alleged that he is personally involved in the administration of the punishment. The story of Robert E. Lee and his involvement in whipping the Norris family is one that has many detractors, it has many defenders. It's a very controversial point in his life and one that many people would be much happy not addressing. Now, I think it's important to bring it up here because whether or not Robert E. Lee was involved in any such action, we do know from his personal letters at the time that even after the fact, he knew he had to make a change. He will write to members of his family that in the aftermath of this escape, the Norrises have been moved further southward to Lee plantations well out of the way of Arlington County. Um, he will also mention in these letters how he is offended at the way that the northern newspapers are treating him. So, uh, again, regardless of what actually happens, it is very clear that Robert E. Lee will respond to it by trafficking members of the Norris family away from Arlington and will stand by his decision to do so. This is all something that Selina Norris Gray is going to be very aware of. And anytime she is going to interact with the Lee family, she knows that her actions will have a direct impact on the future and the safety of her family. And it is a sign of her incredible courage and fortitude that she was able to live in that environment for so long and never once seemingly break in the face of that pressure. So again, that's our little snapshot into slavery in Arlington County and slavery at the Arlington House in general. Uh, but that being said, though, this is not a story about enslavement. We do not remember Selina Norris Gray because she was an enslaved woman at the Arlington plantation. Rather, we remember Selina because of what happens at the outset of the American Civil War. So, moving forward, the armies and the artifacts. This is where Selina Gray is going to step into a whole new world. On May 23rd, 1861, the people of Virginia will formally vote to secede. This is the moment when Virginia formally leaves the Union and joins the Confederacy. When I was growing up, and again, in many history books and many lessons today, we're often taught that Virginia seceded after the firing on Fort Sumter. We're told that Virginia seceded on April 17th, 1861. That is not true. On April 17th, a secession convention in Richmond, Virginia, formally approved the Ordinance of Secession. A convention approved a declaration of secession. That declaration would not go into effect unless it was approved by popular vote on May 23rd. So on April 17th, Virginia doesn't officially secede, but for many people, it feels like they do. In the aftermath of the April 17th designation, lots of forces in the state, some unionist, but many secessionist, will start to make moves so that that May 23rd vote date is little more than a formality, even if it is the legal date of secession or unification. One of the more important things that happens in Arlington is that on April 17th, after that Ordinance of Secession is approved, Colonel Robert E. Lee will resign his commission in the Union Army, and he will tender his services to the state of Virginia. Around this time, Governor John Letcher of the state of Virginia will formally approve Virginia enlist in the Confederate Army. So even though the state has not seceded, Robert E. Lee and Virginia state forces are actively joining the Confederacy formally or informally, whether they realize it or not. As a result of this, the Lee Custis family will leave the Arlington plantation in early May of 1861 and relocate down to Richmond. When they do so, Mary Custis trusts Selina Gray with the house. She leaves her with the keys to the property and, more significantly, the vast collection of George Washington family artifacts that the Lee Custis family has inherited. Again, some people will point to this as a sign of the great trust and the great friendship that was exhibited by the Lees to the Grays, and that may be true, but it also may not be true. If you were to look elsewhere in Arlington, you would see very similar stories with very different relationships. Immediately, the story that comes to mind is that of Hagar Randall. Hagar Randall was an enslaved woman in southern Alexandria County to the Powell family. Much like the Lees, the Powell family leaves Arlington in early 1861, right before that secession vote, to travel further southward and join the Confederacy. And much like the Lees, Mrs. Powell will trust Mrs. Randall with the keys to their farmhouse. However, Hager Randall will attest after the war that they did not have a friendly relationship at all. She will even say that Mrs. Powell had, over the course of her life, sold 3 of the Randall daughters to Louisiana. And by the end of the Civil War, only one had ever returned home. So again, trusting the house is not necessarily a sign of friendship. It is certainly a sign of responsibility, and one that Selina Norris Gray would have taken very seriously, knowing full well not just what could be at stake for her family, but what could be at stake for the insides of the house. Another important thing to remember about Selina Norris Gray is that she was born into this Arlington system. When the Arlington House was built, again, under the direction of George Washington Parke Custis, it was intended to be a monument to George Washington. It was intended to be something of a shrine for the Washington family artifacts. And so people who grew up in that world would have grown up to some degree venerating George Washington, to some degree seeing the importance of the Washington collection. So the responsibility that she is given could not be lost on her. Right as it becomes clear, Arlington County will be caught between secessionist Virginia and Unionist Washington. On May 24th, 1861, within about 12 hours of the Virginians voting to secede from the Union, a Union Army force of about 6,000 men will cross the Potomac River and begin a steady occupation of every corner of Arlington County. The operation contains mostly members of the New York State Militia, and as such, overall command is given to a major general in the New York State Militia, a gentleman by the name of General Charles Sanford. Now, Sanford gives a very comprehensive report of the New York militia's movements into Arlington in the early morning hours of May 24th. And there's a particular passage of his report that I think is very, very telling. So I think I'll go ahead and read that for you. From Sanford's report, he writes, returning thence past the positions of the 28th and 5th regiments, I examined the crossroads in the neighborhood of Arlington. Finding the mansion vacated by the family, I stated to some of the servants left there that had the family remained, I would have established a guard for their security from annoyance. But in consequence of their absence, that I would, by occupying it myself, be responsible for the perfect care and security of the house and everything in and about it. Now, that's just one rather flowery passage in a rather long and flowery report of a movement that ultimately is not a battle. So it might be easy to lose the meaning there, but I think it might be kind of clear when we start to take a step back and assess what exactly Charles Sanford is doing. It is the early morning hours of May 24th. Virginia has just formally seceded. The Union Army is trying to take back Arlington County as quickly as possible so that the Confederacy will not physically overlook the capital. One of the first places that he goes is the Arlington House. And one of the first persons that he talks to is a servant left behind. Now, Charles Sanford doesn't say who that is. It's clear that there's probably more than one person. Maybe he didn't even go as far as to ask who the individuals were that he was speaking to. But he is speaking to them about the whereabouts of the Lee family. He is speaking to them about the maintenance of the house, and he is effectively taking possession of the house from these individuals. I think it is fairly reasonable to suggest that on May 24th, 1861, Charles Sanford is probably talking to Selina Norris Gray or some of the members of her family. Think about that. It is May 24th, 1861. The state of Virginia has just seceded. The Union Army has just invaded the state for the first time. The Civil War is now on in the state of Virginia, and the overall commander of that initial wave, he's only got a few civilians he needs to talk to. Some of them may very well have been the Gray family. It's a sign of how significant the Arlington House was to the federal government, to the Union position, and it's a sign of just how much power Selina Gray has been entrusted with when she is given the keys to the property. This is a symbol not just for Virginia, but for the entirety of the United States. And so on the night of May 24th, the Union Army will formally take possession of the house from the Grays, but the Grays will remain on in the house for the rest of the war. They will actually continue to overlook and manage the Washington artifacts for the next few months. And they will even, as the years progress, work on some modifications to the Arlington House. By December of 1861, Arlington House will be occupied by this gentleman here in the picture, General Irvin McDowell. It is at this time that Selina Norris Gray realizes the Washington artifacts are in danger. In December of 1861, she will personally write and deliver a message to Irvin McDowell, conveying her fears that the presence of so many enlisted soldiers could mean the artifacts would be pillaged and disappear from America forever. At her suggestion, McDowell will take possession of the Washington artifacts and move them to a safe location in the District of Columbia. This is the act for which Selina Norris Gray is perhaps most remembered, this act of saving the Washington artifacts. But her story does not necessarily end there. Indeed, the legacy of the Norris Gray family is one that you can find across Arlington and for a variety of reasons. Now, they are significant to our region for many reasons, some big and some small. First off, if you are traveling in the direction of Pentagon City, you might come across this house here at the bottom of your screen. This is the Harry W. Gray house. Harry Gray was a son of Selina and Thornton. He is going to remain in Arlington after the Civil War. He is going to build this townhome here in our county in the 1880s, and today this house is on the National Register of Historic Places. It's a rather unique type of house for Arlington County. You don't get many of these freestanding brick townhomes circa 1880, 1885, and it is very much an architectural treasure that we are happy to have in our very developed county. It's also worth mentioning that after the Civil War, the rest of the Gray family will stay local to the area. Selina and Thornton will never really stop working. Later census records indicate that Thornton would work as a laborer, Selina as a housekeeper. Some accounts say that they would sell produce in Washington, D.C. on market days. They're going to do this for the next several decades. Selina herself will not pass away until 1907. But her 8 children will live on. As I said, they will stay in the area, and many of them will become community leaders in Arlington County, particularly in the community of Green Valley, which today is one of the oldest African-American neighborhoods in the country. To this day, if you want to learn more about the Gray family and their local impact on Arlington, I will strongly recommend paying a visit to the Black Heritage Museum of Arlington. They have a website that I would recommend checking out first. I can put that description in the chat if you would like. I'm hesitant to give you directions because I know their address has changed a couple times and I would hate to give you the wrong one. But it is a fantastic location. It is administered by local Arlingtonians, many of whom are connected to some of these old founding families of our current communities, and some of which include members of the Gray family. Now, on a slightly larger scale, the Gray family is going to bring Arlington County to national attention. Of course, here we also see an image of the Arlington House taken sometime in the modern day. Beginning in the 1920s, the National Park Service is going to start to overhaul their interpretation of the house. Starting in the 1930s, they're even going to renovate the house and put forward a renovation project that will include a restoration of the Gray family additions. So if you go to Arlington House today, you will see portions of the house that are at least representative of additions made not by the Custis family, not by the Lee family, but by the Gray family. The interpretation of Arlington House also owes much to the Gray family. In the 1920s, park historians would actually interview some of Selina's children for their memories of growing up in the Arlington plantation, growing up with the Custis family and with the Lee family. And so much of our knowledge of day-to-day life at Arlington comes from these such interviews. The Grays really are responsible for part of the interpretive mission that takes place at Arlington House to this day. But again, that enduring legacy is really those Washington artifacts. And today, those artifacts can be found scattered in museums across the country. Right here, we have George Washington's tent. This is an artifact that I've seen at several different locations. I first saw it as a child at Valley Forge National Park in Pennsylvania. This photograph was taken not too long ago of the tent. It has now made its way to the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. So, due to the diligent work of Selina Norris Gray, artifacts like this can now be used to bring the George Washington story to life for people who could otherwise never make it to Mount Vernon, never make it to the Arlington House. It's the benefit of preserving such a powerful collection. It can be spread out to reach brand new audiences. So, whether it be a local story, a state story, a federal story, or just the story of a single family, you come to realize very early on that Selina Norris Gray is she's just much more than the namesake of a park. Really, she's much more than a name that we can attach to a tent. She is an enduring symbol of the trials and tribulations that were faced by countless Americans, men, women, and children brought up in the American South, and specifically in that strange little southern half of the district that was never quite the part of the district they wanted it to be, and was never quite the part of Virginia that they wanted it to be. It's a story that can very easily fall through the cracks, a story that can very easily be generalized to conform with what we know about stories elsewhere in Virginia or stories elsewhere in the district. But no, Selina Norris Gray and her family faced a very relatable struggle through American slavery, but it is a struggle that was still very unique to the Arlington experience, and one that only the strongest-willed person could come out of intact. Given her longevity, her long life in the area, and the legacy that her children leave behind, I think it is very safe to say that not only did she succeed, but she knocked it out of the park.
John, I want to always thank you. John, you do an excellent job at explaining. It's on the hikes, even outside, even in full gear. You do an outstanding job, and that we appreciate all of what you all do from the Nature Center, just everything that you all do for 55 plus is just outstanding. Thank you.
My pleasure. It's always great to work with 55 plus. I'm always happy to see you guys come out. You're always a great group. You've got great questions. You've got great interests, and I can't wait to see you guys again in person in the spring.